This video is going to be inherently a bit different to my normal content. I wanted to talk about this despite the fact that my channel is not a Fortnite channel. It is a violent video game channel, theoretically, so I wanted to talk about what exactly that means. The reason I want to bring this up is because recently in my lovely country of Australia, Fortnite Battle Royale has been underneath some fire. Basically, a bunch of news articles and even TV segments dropped about video game violence, and the main target of this was Fortnite. Gamers all over the world seem to be a little bit upset about this, and when I say a little bit upset, I mean quite upset. And whilst it's very easy to look at these types of articles and go, Fortnite isn't violent, that's not really true. It's also not the direction to take this conversation, because if you believe Fortnite is not inherently violent, well then you're on the losing side of that argument. Fortnite absolutely is a violent game, and when a news reporter says something like this,
the last man standing wins, so they're just killing each other. There's no storyline.
And then somebody with as big of a voice as Champ Chong says something like this,
it's so much more than just killing. Sure, it's a part of it, but come on.
As long as you're not a biased person, it's hard not to side with the reporter because the reporter's just right here. Fortnite is an inherently violent video game, thrown onto an island where you have to gather resources and fight off against other people, and when I say fight off, I mean you kill them. But this is not the important part of the conversation. The important part is, does it actually matter if Fortnite is a violent video game? These segments often talk about aiming down the sights of the gun, and you're really in the perspective of the player, and that immersion aspect of video games, as if aiming down the sights of a gun in a video game would somehow lead to you aiming down the sights of a real gun. This always comes up with new forms of media, and it's just something to expect from the older generation, regardless of what generation that ends up being at the time. Some of you guys who are a little bit younger may not remember this, but rock music in the early 2000s and the early 90s and stuff like that all got called satanic and all this stuff. It was going to corrupt the minds of the youth. The same thing even got said about movies all the way back when they were black and white. The same thing happened with TV. It's even been happening with games for quite some time, and mark my words, it will happen with YouTube creators as well. And the same thing will happen with VR forms of those media as well. People will say VR films are satanic and that they're going to corrupt the minds of the youth because you're putting themselves, in some cases you're putting them in the shoes of a horror victim or something like that, depending on what VR film you're watching. Same thing will happen with VR television and VR video games and VR YouTube videos. It will all happen all over again. But the sad thing is, it's actually really difficult to convince people who do believe video games cause violence. It's pretty close to impossible to convince some of those people that they don't lead to violence, because if you already believe that video games cause violence, then you've already ignored the fact that people said the same thing about music, movies, and TV. And despite more and more TV shows, movies, and music being produced every single day, and arguably getting even more violent as time goes on, despite all of that, violent crime has done nothing but climb down since the 90s across the Western world. The 90s was the big boom of all of these things. TV has been around a lot longer, and music's been around a lot longer, but all of these things have existed in such a more easy accessible format since the 90s, especially when you talk about the early 2000s with the introduction of the internet in every single home. Well, not every single home, but that's when it really started to kick off. And to still, after all of that, believe in this idea of violent video games creating violent people, you would also have to ignore the fact that not a single study has drawn a causal link between video games and real-world violence. And that's not for a lack of trying. All the studies attempting to do this just failed. Some parents may be watching this video and wonder how this is even possible. With the amount of violence in video games doing nothing but increasing with games like Mortal Kombat and GTA, how are children not getting more and more violent? It's actually quite simple. When people play video games, we don't think we are the characters we're playing. It's just that. It's just a character. And especially for a video game like Fortnite with no story at all, it's more like a sport than anything else. You're trying to win the objective. You're trying to eliminate the opponent from the match, not murder them. Nobody cares that they killed the opponent, rather that they made the opponent remove themselves from the match. It's just, in the context of a game where you're shooting each other, people just call it killed. In fact, Fortnite explicitly says eliminated when you eliminate an enemy, rather than killed, because the killing part isn't the important part at all. When you start to think about violence in a simulated environment like video games, and you're not okay with your child partaking in that, you're not okay with your child eliminating an opponent from a particular match because they're murdering them inside of the video game, ask yourself, what is the difference between that and eliminating a friend in a match of dodgeball. The obvious difference being the visualization of guns in the video game. But people who play these video games don't see it like that at all. The kid talking about how much he likes the tack in Fortnite isn't saying how much he loves pump-action shotguns, he's saying how much he loves that gun because it wins games. It's not about the gun, it's about the impact it has in the game, the function that it has in the game. I just wanted to get my thoughts out there on this topic because there has been quite a big buzz about it, especially in my country, and I'm also curious to hear your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. My name has been Bilbzy, and I will see you in the next one.